Seen something remarkable happen in America. For the first time, a senior official linked to the COVID-19 pandemic has been charged and might go to jail. The indictment of Dr. David Morens, a close assistant to Dr. Tony Fauci, could also help us understand how Fauci stifled a debate about the origins of the mysterious virus that suddenly appeared in Wuhan 7 years ago. Hi, I'm Jasper Becker, and I've been writing about China for over 40 years. And one of my books is about this subject. It's called Made in China, Wuhan COVID and the Quest for Biotech Supremacy. The indictment of Dr. Morens could help us understand what happened in Washington right after the pandemic started. He was working for Dr. Fauci, who was the former chief medical officer and the key figure in American infectious disease research for 50 years. Dr. Morens is accused of deliberately hiding communications. When Fauci and a bunch of top scientists were discussing what the origin of the virus might be, they apparently wanted to keep their discussions off the official record and even use burner phones. It's all as if a conspiracy was taking place. Subsequently, they agreed to squash any public discussion of the lab theory. That is, the idea that this might be a man-made disaster. So the trial may confirm what we already suspect, that those who derided the lab leak theory as an absurd conspiracy were saying the opposite in their private emails, and also that they wanted to hide the fact that the United States, which had stopped gain-of-function experiments at home because they were too risky, was funding the very same research in Wuhan. Dr. Fauci has repeatedly denied this. China and America were also allowing these experiments to take place in a laboratory which has been criticized to have problems with safety and security. The Wuhan Institute of Virology was doing two dangerous things. First, its staff had spent years going around caves, mines, and jungles, collecting samples from bats and other creatures to find viruses that were new and potentially dangerous. Next, it experimented on those viruses. This was the gain-of-function research, deliberately altering the genetic makeup of viruses to create a new hybrid virus, a chimera. They specifically set out to see how a bat virus could become more contagious in mice and potentially human beings. This is well documented in research grants and proposals and published scientific papers. The Americans collaborated with all these activities, offering both money and expert advice. But why exactly were they doing this? We're not really sure even now. Even stranger is the fact that this went on even though the United States knew that the Wuhan Institute of Virology was working closely with the People's Liberation Army on public health research, biosecurity projects, and on these coronaviruses. Researchers used the Wuhan lab for virology and vaccine work ever since it had opened in 2017. Our 2021 US State Department fact sheet confirms that the Wuhan lab engaged in classified research, including laboratory animal experiments on behalf of the Chinese military. The Institute collaborated on publications and secret projects with the PLA, despite presenting itself as a civilian institution. Now, none of this matters very much if, as Dr. Fauci and others claim, the COVID-19 coronavirus had nothing to do with a laboratory. In other words, that it emerged and mutated in different animals in the wild, and then these animals infected humans at a wet market selling these wild creatures. In which case, it is just pure coincidence that this wet market happened to be in Wuhan. 7 years on, nothing new about this theory has come to light. What exactly were these wild animals? Several intermediate species must be involved for a virus meant for a bat to evolve sufficiently to infect a human being. We are very different from bats. No further light has been shed on this question because China stopped looking. It claims the virus entered China from abroad. So, end of story. Nothing to do with China. And therefore, nothing much has changed at the laboratory in China or with this kind of research. None of the key scientists and officials involved in the research at the Wuhan Institute of Virology have been fired. Shi Zhengli, the famous bat woman, has continued collecting and analyzing bat viruses. Cao Wushun, who worked with her since 2012, is carrying on at the PLA Academy of Military Medical Sciences, working on military-linked infectious disease research. And the Wuhan Institute of Virology is still doing the same risky work on new bat coronaviruses, although no longer with US research grants. China does have a new biosecurity law with tighter controls, but we know little about how it is being enforced. We can see, however, that the pandemic has done nothing to slow down China's investment in biotech. In areas like genetic editing, known as CRISPR, it has expanded massively. China is becoming the leading country in clinical and applied gene editing. By 2025, it has conducted over 7,100 clinical trials, compared to 6,200 in the United States. China's share of global innovative drug candidates has grown quickly and now matches the United States. It is the world's second largest source of new molecular entities. China has approved a record 76 innovative drugs in 2025. China, it seems, can often do things faster and cheaper than in other countries. Perhaps this is because it is more reckless. And this means it could dominate the biotech industry in the way it has done for the electric vehicle industry and the lithium battery sector. But if the official narrative on what happened in Wuhan in 2019 falls apart, and we learn that the pandemic was indeed a man-made disaster, all that would change very rapidly. There would be huge pressure put on the industry to start very tight controls and international government supervision. This would have a huge effect across the world. The industry, worth nearly $1 trillion, would have to change. The hundreds of billions spent on research would decline and might very well be spent in other areas of research. And scientific and commercial cooperation with China might come to an end. If you enjoyed this analysis, please like and subscribe and tell me what you think in the comments below.